I started working in a nursing home in my hometown when I was 18. I was one of the youngest nurse's assistants on my shift, and needless to say, I was the one that got pranked and scared shitless during the whole shift. I worked 210 and many times 10-6 since I was young and had no life at the time. I didn't mind. The money was good and I loved the people. One night we had a woman go a little batshit crazy. I'll call her Norma. She was one of my favorites, and I was the one she always called for when she needed something like a bath or just the regular conversation. She started walking the halls with her Bible trying to get out, even when as far as biting some of my coworkers, and I was the only one that could get her back in her room and back to bed. One day I came into work, and my boss informed me that she had to go away to an institution. He said that they couldn't get her in the van, and I seemed to be their go-to person when it came to convincing someone to do something, since all the residents seemed to love me. I don't know why, maybe it was because I was young and sweet at the time. I went to her room and told her she needed to go and it was going to be okay and that I would see her very soon again. She went and weeks went by, and one day my boss called me into her office to tell me Norma passed away from kidney failure. I was sad and put it on the back of my mind and went on with work. About 4 months later, one of the lights to her old room went off. A new lady was in there, and she never talked to me before since I had been off for about a week with personal issues. So she didn't know me at all, and I hadn't been to her room that day. I was passing out ice when one of my coworkers came around the corner with a very pale face and white eyes. I looked at her and said, "What's wrong with you? You look like you've seen a ghost." She said, "I think I did." I said, "You're not going to get me that easy today." She said, "No, the lady in Norma's old room asked for you by name and wants to tell you something." I just laughed and said, "You're not funny." She said, "No, I'll go with you, but you have to go." So I went, expecting they must have put this poor woman up to something. As I walked in the room, I said, "Yes, Mrs. Anna. What can I help you with?" She said, "I was talking to a lady named Norma, and she wanted me to tell you something." I looked at my coworker, who was clearly not smiling but standing in horror when she said, "Norma wanted me to tell you she is back and she misses you. She said she used to live in this room and that was her chair, and she just wanted to come see you, but when I got back from the restroom, she was gone." I gave her a look of "What the fuck?" and she said, "What's wrong, dear?" "I thought you would be happy to see her again." I said, "I'll be right back." And I closed her door and said to my coworker, "You're not fucking funny." She said, "Honey, I didn't do this." She wasn't one not to tell me when she was playing a trick, and I never went back to inform the lady that Norma had passed away a few months ago. I came to find out that while I was on my week off, about 2 days after the lady had arrived, she started asking if she could speak to me by my name. Again, I had never met her or seen this lady in my life, and I avoided that room as much as possible. I even had the lady's shower schedule changed to in the mornings and not evenings when I worked. I worked as a dietary aide in the cafeteria at 18 years old. It was my first job, and overall I enjoyed my stay. The patients loved me a lot, and I loved them too. Even if it was just handing them food for the day, it made me happy that they were happy. One time we got this kid who was about my age, we'll call him N. He was Chinese and was so quiet you would think the guy was mute. He never ate and usually just sat alone in the cafeteria even when I closed up. So one day on movie night I was closing up and he was just sitting there at a table again alone. The lights were dim and overall the hospital was generally creepy at night. I asked him in my softest and most polite tone I could muster, "N, don't you want to join the others for movie night?" And then he stared at me. We stood there for what felt like forever. He was completely silent and motionless, and I was sweating from nervousness by now. His eyes were empty as if he was zoning out while staring at me. Here I am alone with a patient whose sickness, I had no idea what it was. I was a little scared for my life as I felt a sense of dread coming over me. Then he stood up. He muttered something like, "Okay," and walked out. I never felt such relief in my life and hadn't realized I was holding my breath. The scary thing is that it turns out N suffered from severe schizophrenia and depression. He could not go into college because of his illness and behavior, resulting in his parents completely disowning him. It broke him even further, and I later realized why he was so quiet. He was never listening to me or real people. He was quiet because he was listening to all the voices in his head, which would tell him to kill people, how to do it, and what to do with the body after. I was alone with a dangerous level schizophrenic who was listening to voices that were most likely telling him to kill me that entire time as we stared at each other. He just charged 2 days later and he never returned to our facility, but I hope he's doing okay wherever he is now. Here's my story. 5 years ago, when I was 12, my sister was 14 and my younger cousin was 3, something strange happened to us. One night, the 3 of us were playing hide and seek. After a few games, it was our younger cousin's turn to come and find us. Like most young children, she couldn't stand being it, but we talked her into playing anyways. My sister's bedroom was downstairs and was the first room you saw coming down, as it was right across the stairwell. Between the stairs and my sister's room was a large storage closet to the left, which my father called the devil's room because he loved to scare us by saying things like, "If you don't do the dishes now, you can sleep in the devil's room tonight." I now realize that this is kind of messed up, but anyway, to the right was the hallway, which consisted of 2 more bedrooms, a bathroom, and at the very end of the hallway was the laundry room. We always did our counting in my sister's bedroom, so our little cousin began counting. I ran to the end of the hall to hide in the laundry room, and my sister stayed in her bedroom and hid under her bed like a smartass. After a 30-second count, my cousin began looking for us, and we could hear her walking around. After about half a minute, we hear her open the door to the devil's room, and I remember hearing her say, "Angel, what are you doing?" I'm a girl with pale skin, long dark hair, average height, and dark eyes that are nearly black. She said, "Angel, stop it, I found you." We hear her laughing, and her laugh quickly turns into a scream. I dart down the hallway, and in seconds I'm carrying her into my sister's bedroom, trying to cheer her up. She's crying and looks scared and confused. Then all she said was, "Angel wouldn't talk to me. She just looked at me and made an ugly face at me." My cousin began to cry even harder as I explained that I wasn't hiding in the closet. She asked who that was, and we told her we didn't know. Since this incident, a few other family members have recalled seeing this little girl and thinking it was me until she disappears into thin air. My cousin would come over to my house every weekend for about 3 to 4 months straight. Me and him didn't see each other for about 3 years prior to this. We've always been like brothers all our lives, so I love the fact that I got to see him so often. This happened about 4 months ago, and every time he came over, I would always suggest going for a walk whenever we got bored. I live in a relatively peaceful suburb of Victoria, and I had never heard or seen anything strange in at least 5 years, so I didn't think twice about going for a walk late at night. It was about 11 o'clock at night or so, and my parents had some people over having a few drinks and being loud, laughing, and just having a good time. The typical staff adults do when they have a get-together. My cousin and I were in my room playing video games when I suggested to him we'd go for a walk. He was used to me asking every time he came over, so he agreed. And we headed off on what we thought would be a typical walk around the neighborhood. At the end of the street, you can go either left or right. We went right, and when we came to the roundabout, there were 4 different ways we could go. I decided to go left towards a park that was down the end of the road. I should note that the park also has a basketball court next to it. But anyway, my cousin didn't live in the area, so he always let me lead the way. My cousin and I are quite loud when we get together, and we always yell and make jokes and are a bit obnoxious. Typical teenagers. As we were talking up the street towards the park, I noticed someone on the basketball court. I told my cousin to be quiet because I thought it was polite to not act like a couple of idiots. I thought it was just someone playing basketball since there are houses on the left side of the park and across the road. But there was no sounds of anyone playing. As we got closer, we saw that it was a man in a white hoodie. He had his hood up and was looking at the ground, standing directly in the middle of the court, not moving. I whispered to my cousin, "What the fuck?" I then whispered to him to go this way, nodding my head to the left back towards the street I lived on. We never took our eyes off the guy, though, and we were sure to be as quiet as possible. I'm sure he had heard us, however. Even when we were being quiet, we were still quite loud. The guy never turned around to look at us, though, and he never moved a muscle. We weren't paying attention to where we were walking and kicked some wood that was laying on the footpath. If talking wasn't enough to get his attention, that definitely would have been. The street filled with the sound of crashing wood. "Fuck," I whispered. I turned back to look at the guy, and he still hadn't moved or turned to look at us. And he was still in the middle of the basketball court. At this point, my cousin and I were creeped the fuck out. I said to my cousin, "Fuck this, let's go home." He agreed, and we got to the end of the street around the bend, and we were about to walk down my street. My cousin said to me, "Hey, let's go back and see if he's still there." Me being me, I said to him, "All right, let's go." And instead of going the way we just came, we went to the same way we originally went, essentially doing a big loop. And this is where it got really creepy. It would have been only a minute before we got back to the basketball court, and I looked at my cousin with a what the fuck look, and he gave me the same one. The basketball court was empty. This isn't too strange because he could have simply lived in one of the houses near there and went back inside after we walked past. I asked my cousin what he wanted to do, and he said to keep walking. I said okay, and we started walking past the park. It's a fairly big park, and it has no lights whatsoever in it, so it's pitch black. My cousin jokingly says, "Hey, let's go through the park. I'm not afraid of the dark." So I said all right then. He gave me a strange look, and we were about to walk through. I looked and saw a dark figure, though. Now there are a few trees in the park, so I assumed it was one of them, but I noticed that this figure was actually standing behind a tree, and it moved very slightly further behind it. I was seriously creeped out, but I didn't want to say anything now, so I laughed and said to my cousin, "Nah, I'm joking, man, fuck that, let's go this way." And started walking the way we were going to go in the first place. We walked up the street. It was one straight run for about 15 minutes before we got to the main road. My cousin and I were constantly joking about the guy saying he could be in one of the houses we were walking past or in one of the many houses that were being built at the time. We even went as far as saying he lived in one of the dumpsters that was in the street. We laughed and tried to diffuse how creeped out we were. By this time, we were about 300 meters up the road when I turned around, just to see if the guy was following us. He wasn't, but what I saw still sent shivers down my spine. At the very end of the street, just on the edge of the park, I saw him, the guy in the white hoodie, still up looking down the street at us. I turned back around and continued talking to my cousin. I'm sure he was the one behind the tree. I didn't tell my cousin I saw someone behind the tree, though. I didn't want to freak him out, and I didn't tell him I saw the guy staring at us now. My cousin told me he didn't want to walk much further, and asked to turn around and go home. There was no way in hell I was going back that way, though. So I made up some bullshit that I wanted to go to the shop that was just down the road. He wasn't happy, but he said, "All right, the shops are closed at this point," which I knew, but I acted disappointed anyway. So we went along the way home, which took us about 45 minutes or so. When we got back, my parents and their friends were still up talking and stuff, and they hadn't realized we left and didn't realize we came in. My cousin and I went into my room and continued playing video games. We went to sleep about an hour later, and the next day his dad picked him up at about 10 in the morning. But the story doesn't end here. The next weekend, my cousin, like usual, was over at my house. We were talking about what happened the previous weekend when we suggested we go for a walk again. I didn't really want to, after what happened, but I reluctantly agreed, and he said he wanted to go past the basketball court again. I said okay. And we were walking towards it when we saw it was very faintly lit up by flickering orange light. We got closer, and I told him I wasn't feeling well, so once again we turned and left, and started heading towards my street. We looked in the court, and in the middle was a small fire. What we saw next still makes us uncomfortable. Sitting around the fire were 5 people, all with hoodies on, not moving, not talking, just looking directly at the fire. My cousin and I looked at each other and quietly but quickly got the hell out of there. I don't know what they were doing, and I don't know if it had something to do with the guy we saw the previous week, but I know my cousin and I never went for walks late at night again. I never told anyone about what happened, and as far as I know, he never did either. What still creeps me out is that this only happened 5 minutes from my house in a seemingly quiet place. We moved since this happened, but our new house is only up the road from the old one, and that guy and those fire weirdos live in the same area I do. So to the men in the white hoodie and the creepy fire weirdos, let's never ever fucking meet.